There is a moment that happens at almost every public lake in the world. Someone reaches into a bag. They pull out bread. They walk to the edge of the water, and they throw it. And the swans come. And for a few minutes, everything feels right. The children are delighted. The swans are close. There is a connection happening, or something that feels like one, between people and wild animals that usually keep their distance. And the person walking away from that lake feels good about what they just did. They should not. What actually happens inside a swan's body when it eats bread? What happens to the structure of a swan population when a lake becomes a regular feeding site? And what happens to individual birds that grow up on human food instead of the diet they are built for, is something that most of the people throwing that bread have never been told. Not because the information is hidden, because nobody at that lake is saying it out loud. This video is going to say it out loud. And before you decide this does not apply to you because you feed swans responsibly or occasionally or with the right things, stay with me through number 3. Because the problem is not only what you are feeding them, it is what feeding them at all does to an animal that was never supposed to need you. Number 1. What bread actually does to a swan. Bread is not poison. This is important to say clearly, because the conversation around feeding swans bread has become so charged that some people have started treating it as though a single piece of white bread is an emergency. It is not. A swan that eats some bread on some days is not in immediate danger. The problem is dose, frequency, and what bread displaces. A mute swan's natural diet is primarily aquatic vegetation. Pondweed, waterweed, algae, the submerged plants that a healthy lake produces in abundance. These plants provide the specific nutritional profile that a swan's physiology is built around, high in the minerals and trace elements required for feather development, bone density, and the physiological demands of breeding. Low in simple carbohydrates, nothing like bread. Bread is almost entirely simple carbohydrates. It provides calories. It provides almost nothing else. A swan that fills up on bread at a lake where people feed regularly is a swan that is not eating aquatic vegetation. The calories are there, the nutrition is not. And the consequences of that gap show up in ways that are specific, documented, and deeply unpleasant. The most visible consequence is a condition called angel wing. It affects young swans, cygnets, during the critical growth window when their wings are developing. Angel wing causes the flight feathers to grow twisted outward rather than flat against the body. The wing sets in the wrong position permanently. An adult swan with angel wing cannot fly. It cannot migrate if it needs to. It cannot escape predators the way a healthy swan can. It will spend the rest of its life on that lake, grounded, because during a specific window in its development, it consumed too many simple carbohydrates and not enough of the nutrients that growing flight feathers correctly requires. The link between high-carbohydrate supplementary feeding and angel wing in waterfowl is well established in the research literature. Bread is not the only cause, but bread at the volume that popular feeding lakes receive is a significant contributing factor. And the swans that pay the price for it are the cygnets, the ones that had no choice about what they were fed because they were young and the food was there, and their parents could not prevent them from eating it. Number 2. What feeding does to the lake itself. This is the part that most people never think about, because it happens slowly and below the surface. A lake that receives regular supplementary feeding by the public is not the same ecological system as a lake that does not. The difference accumulates over months and years in ways that are eventually visible, but that are almost never connected by the people causing them to the feeding behavior that produced them. Uneaten bread and other food thrown into a lake does not simply disappear. It sinks. It decomposes. Decomposition consumes oxygen in the water and releases phosphates and nitrates. Elevated phosphates and nitrates feed algae growth. Algae blooms reduce water clarity, block sunlight from reaching submerged plants, and when the algae dies and decomposes in turn, the oxygen levels in the water can drop low enough to kill fish and invertebrates. The technical term for this process is eutrophication. The informal term for what it produces is a dead lake. Green, opaque, smelling of algae, with fewer fish, fewer invertebrates, and, critically, fewer aquatic plants. The aquatic plants that are the natural food base of the swans that the feeding was supposed to help. The feeding destroys the food source it was meant to supplement. Not immediately. Not dramatically. Over years, in increments, with no single loaf of bread being the obvious cause. But the direction of the process is consistent, and the end point is a lake that supports far less wildlife than it did before people started trying to improve it with supermarket bread. Number 3. What feeding does to the swans themselves. Not their bodies. Their behavior. This is the part that is hardest to talk about because it implicates something that feels innocent. The connection people feel at the water's edge, the way the swans come close, the sense that something real is passing between you and a wild animal. Something real is passing between you, but it is not what you think it is. Swans that are fed regularly at a specific location learn that location as a food source. They return to it. They wait at it. They become, over time, less oriented toward the natural behaviors that wild swans perform. The active foraging, the territorial management, the full range of behaviors that a swan living on a self-sustaining lake uses throughout its day, and more oriented toward the feeding site, toward waiting, toward the approach behavior that gets rewarded with food. Researchers studying habituation in waterfowl describe this process in terms of behavioral conditioning. The swan is not becoming tame in any meaningful sense. It is becoming conditioned. The distinction matters. A conditioned swan at a feeding lake is not a swan that trusts humans. It is a swan that has learned that a specific set of human behaviors, approaching the water, reaching into a bag, throwing things, predicts the arrival of food. The swan responds to the prediction. What it feels about the humans involved is not part of the calculation. What this produces at busy feeding lakes is a population of swans that have reorganized significant parts of their behavior around human activity. They are more aggressive toward each other because the food concentration at the feeding point intensifies competition. They are more aggressive toward humans when the expected food does not appear. They are less capable, in some documented cases, of the sustained independent foraging that a wild swan on an unfed lake performs as a matter of daily necessity. The swans at the most heavily fed public lakes in Britain and Europe are, in a specific behavioral sense, less wild than they were before the feeding started. Not domesticated, but changed, oriented differently, running a different version of the behavioral repertoire they were built to run. And the people feeding them caused that change while trying to do something kind. Number 4. What you should actually do instead. This section exists because telling people what not to do without telling them what to do is how you lose them. And the people reading this are not the enemy. They are people who went to a lake, saw swans, wanted to connect with something beautiful, and did the thing that every other person at that lake was doing. The impulse is not the problem. The bread is the problem. And bread has alternatives. If you want to feed swans, the options that do not carry the nutritional risks of bread are specific and easy to source. Defrosted frozen peas, cut in half, are close enough to the texture and size of natural food items that swans consume them without the displacement problem. Leafy greens, lettuce, spinach, torn into small pieces, provide actual nutritional content rather than empty carbohydrate. Corn, either fresh or defrosted from frozen, is a significantly better option than bread in terms of nutritional profile. None of these options will produce the same frenzy that bread does. Swans come to bread fast, and in numbers because bread is calorie-dense, and they have learned to associate it with rapid energy return. The alternatives are less exciting to a conditioned swan. That is partly the point. Feeding that does not produce a frenzy. That does not concentrate 20 birds in a 10-foot radius around a single person, is feeding that is doing less damage to the behavioral and social structure of the lake. The deeper option, the one that requires more than a different item from the supermarket, is to support the conditions that make supplementary feeding unnecessary. Clean water initiatives, aquatic plant restoration projects, the removal of sources of eutrophication from lake catchment areas. A lake with healthy aquatic vegetation growing in it does not need people to come and feed its swans. The swans are already fed. They are fed the way they were fed for millions of years before anyone thought to reach into a bag. Number 5. The swan that cannot fly. I want to come back to angel wing, because I think it is the thing that makes this real in a way that statistics and ecological processes do not. There is, almost certainly, a swan with angel wing at a lake near you. Not maybe. Almost certainly. Angel wing is not rare in populations where supplementary feeding is common, and supplementary feeding is common at almost every accessible public lake in the developed world. That swan was a cygnet once. It was on the water with its parents during the growth window when its wing feathers were forming. People came to that lake with bread. The cygnet ate. The carbohydrates exceeded what its developing system could process correctly. The feathers grew wrong. They set in the wrong position. And when the time came for that cygnet to take its first flight, it could not. It has not flown since. It will not fly. It will live out whatever lifespan it has on that one stretch of water, unable to do the thing that swans do, unable to leave if conditions deteriorate, unable to escape if the threat that comes for it one night is faster than it can swim. The person who threw the bread that contributed to that outcome was not malicious. They were almost certainly kind. They were doing what people do at lakes. They had no idea. That is the whole point. The information exists. The research is clear. The consequences are visible at lakes all over the world to anyone who knows what angel wing looks like. But the connection between the bag of bread and the grounded swan is never made at the water's edge, because nobody is there to make it. Now you know what it looks like. The next time you stand at the edge of that water, the next time you reach into a bag or watch someone else reach into one, you will see the whole chain. The bread, the cygnet, the feathers forming wrong in a window that will not open again, the adult swan that watches other swans lift off the water and cannot follow. You did not mean to cause it, but knowing what you know now, you have a choice that the people who came before you did not have. Make a different one. Tell me in the comments, is there a lake near you where you have seen angel wing in a swan, or where the feeding has visibly changed how the birds behave? I want to know what you are seeing out there. I read every one.